Forbes India presents AWS The Mavericks in association with IvyCap Ventures.
Thank you very much for having me and welcome to this session. I want to start by putting a historical context to where we are. Some people call banking the second oldest profession in the world. While that is not true, and it's not accurate, but the fact is it's been around for since perhaps 10,000 BC. In India, banking has been around since about 2000 BC. And for much of these thousands of years, it's been a relatively boring profession with some scares and excitements off and on. Where we sit today, I would say, is perhaps for humanity and for all of us in this room, perhaps the most exciting time in financial services ever in human history. And I want to pause to get this time context there, because we've had a bunch of factors shape this, why we are here. And we are all kind of, familiar with that. But the extent of change and excitement and possibilities across the world that exist today at one go have perhaps not been there in human history ever. And this change is transformative because we are going to consume all kinds of products in different ways. It's not the checkbook anymore. It's not the teller anymore. You don't go to, you don't have to step out of your house to trade stock. You don't have to go to a currency counter in an airport to change currencies. And the possibilities of changes in products are just endless. Similarly, it's highly disruptive. So I just quote another banker. He basically said, banking will always be there, but we don't know the shape and form banks will take. Is Google a bank? Or is State Bank of India a bank? Etc., right? And the third point here is that it's going to be ubiquitous. The extent of change, possible here is likely to touch perhaps most of the 8 billion people that exist on the planet today. So that's the kind of scale and times that we are talking about. And I'm not going to talk about, I think the drivers to these are sort of well known, and I think even in India we are clear about what's happened in the last 10 years in demonetization, JAM, UPI, whole formalization of the economy, a bunch of things, right? But let's take a look at least the factors that are taking shape today and what's driving this change going forward. I mean, the first one obviously is technology. And you can't sort of have financial services anymore without technology. That's why we call it fintech. And whether you are a bank or you are a new age fintech, you have to embrace technology. It's a given. And some of the technologies that are really driving some of the changes that we see, at the heart of it is data. And on top of the data is the entire AI, ML revolution, which is also recent, but which is yet to pan out in its entire capabilities. So to give you an example, let's take fraud detection. Today, with the use of AI, banks and others are able to look at what transactions are abnormal, what situations are abnormal, what transfers are abnormal, and perhaps detect fraud much faster, quicker, at a scale which is unimaginable. Uh, the second piece of technology is obviously blockchain. Now, blockchain, I think everyone is very familiar with crypto and the excitement of having alternate currencies and alternate asset class. But the applications of blockchain are again enormous. Trade finance, entire documentation, any smart contracts, all of that can be driven by blockchain. Right? Third important thing is the cloud. Because historically, and I'm told even today, there are Fortran programs running on mainframes in several of the largest institutions in the world. But come cloud and come SaaS, that's chipping away and giving, first of all, incumbents capabilities to use a variety of software at scale and speed. And at the same time, it's giving new age companies to come and disrupt the playground for the incumbents. The fourth example of technology is IoT. Believe me, the watch, the Apple Watch that some of you have, or the Fitbit, that's perhaps most valuable for the insurance company because of the data that it gives you. And even around you, instead of looking at a checkbook, today you can have biometric to really withdraw from an ATM or a small kirana shop or even a correspondent banker in the remotest part of the country. So these and more technologies, I'm just naming a few, is really one big driver for the change that we see ourselves in. The second, and we are all lucky to be here, doubly lucky. First, to be part of this fintech revolution, but secondly, to be in India. I think the enormity of the macro tailwinds that we see in India today, and the enormity of what that can deliver in the next 10 years is just not fully and truly appreciated. Consider the fact that in '91, when the government of Narasimha Rao launched the reform program, our GDP was around 250 billion. Today, we are probably around 3.25 trillion. So we have added 3 trillion in the last roughly 30 years. Now, the jury is out, and several people sit down with their calculators and Excel sheets, and when is the economy likely to double to 5 trillion, 6 trillion. And the jury is out. It can be 6 years, 8 years, 10 years. I think the math does not matter. The fact is that in the next decade, we will be adding $3 trillion more to the GDP. Now, what does it do to the scale of financial products? What does it do to the size of the payment industry? What does it do to savings? I think India has probably household savings itself is about 20% of GDP or round about that, today, which is about $500 billion. With higher incomes, more GDP, more savings, even if it goes to 25 trillion, to 25% of GDP, we are talking of $1.5 trillion in savings per year. So if you thought that the number of demat accounts opened in the last 2 years was huge and unsustainable, be ready for perhaps 100 million more demat accounts to be added. Maybe many of the people who work for us at our homes, they would be ready to trade stock. The size of the macro and the numbers themselves give scale and give a multiplier effect to the fintech opportunities like never before. The third important factor here is actually geopolitics. And before I come to geopolitics, let's talk about regulation, because regulation is an important factor. Regulation of data, whether to have, who owns the data? Is it the consumer? Is it the banks? Countries like Australia have moved to open banking, whether you got to make available data for any fintechs to use or other people to use. How will that pan out? And if the data is available to everyone, what is the scale of innovation that somebody who has the domain expertise in financial services and the technology expertise can build? Right. Second important part of regulation is how do you regulate fintechs? How do you regulate social media players? Is Google potentially a bank? Is Apple potentially a bank? Should it be regulated like a bank? Should fintechs be regulated like a bank? And again, there are various points of view on that, but that's a trend that is important to watch. Right? The next aspect is geopolitics. I think it's quite clear that we are moving to from sort of one unified world where the world moved in one direction to sort of a multipolar world or whatever term we want to use, but very broadly a world where different countries or groups of countries will have different interests. Now, what does that do to, let's say, cross-border transfers? Does it always have to be denominated in the US dollar? Or will a stable coin or some crypto come and disrupt that more and more? That's going to be a big driver for what's going to happen going forward. In addition to that, I think it's also very clear that different geographies and different countries have a very different view on protecting data in their own countries. It's clear that data is not going to be free-flowing across the border, and people are going to create walled gardens or selectively manage data to move across boundaries. The last but not the least, I think, in terms of trend that we should all watch out for is the funding environment. We've had a fantastic run in the last 2 years, for both from, I think, across industries, and certainly for the fintech startups and those of you who are founders. I think it's very clear that times will change and are changing as we speak. Cost of capital will not remain zero. There's a finite cost of capital, and liquidity will not be infinite, and therefore capital will become relatively scarce as compared to last year. Not scarce in terms of the context of, let's say, last 15, 20 years, but certainly scarcer as compared to the last 2 years. Which means we got to modify our behavior, the ventures we build, how we spend, capital efficiency, etc., as we go forward. Now, how does this, therefore, what does this translate into, right? All these trends and the enormity of where we are today. The first thing, I think, for all of us in the room, all of us know that if you look at the last 10 years, a lot of industry has been talking about just payments, and when payments change, then everyone is talking of lending. We need to have a much more wider thought process, because the opportunities are much wider than simply lending or simply payments. And as an investor, we see a lot more lending companies than you see other type of companies that are out there. And some of the opportunities, I think, are underrepresented as far as in the founding world. I would say, by the way, lending is not over. I'm a great fan of specialized lending. So, for instance, people with expertise in agriculture and finance, they could come up and innovate and come up with a stream of products related to agriculture, farmer, supply chain, uh, related to retail, same thing, retail finance, related to construction, shipping, cross-border, trade. I think trade finance is terribly underrepresented in my view in terms of the number of startups. Cross-border, I know a lot of cross-border like startups elsewhere in the world are focused on cross-border, but in India perhaps a lot more is possible here. And not to forget inclusion. I think even at the bottom of pyramid, right from micro or completely micro savings to inclusion in terms of payments, etc. Lots and lots is possible on the inclusion side of things. Second important aspect of this is, for all of us, is to think global. And I think already what we are seeing is that lots of other countries want to adopt the Jam Trinity that we have built in India, which is a very unique platform compared to the rest of the world, applicable in many countries. And I believe the Indian government is working with sort of multilateral agencies to take this to as many as 60-odd countries they are in discussions with. Now, if that transfers and RuPay transfers, and then why can't founders and business models built in India also go global? So it's really an opportunity for us to, having innovated at the fintech level and the infrastructure and the platform level, it's an opportunity for business models built in India really to go global. And I hope that many founders in this room take that opportunity. The third aspect that exists before us is SaaS and security. Now, IT services basically build the backbone and infrastructure and software for banks and insurance companies across the world. And they've kind of created a dominant position in that. Can our SaaS startups and can our cybersecurity startups replicate that in their respective spaces? And there's an opportunity to do that at the moment. And the other sort of important thing is, as we look at coming to the constraints of the financial environment or some limitations of the financial environment, very important now to build business models that are capital efficient, that are built on a sustainable manner, that don't just rely on acquiring lenders with no unit economics or acquiring borrowers with no unit economics. And so you really need to build business models which are scalable, but at the same time viable. And as a resultant of this, right, you start looking at technology and infrastructure, which is highly scalable and built in the right way. And last but not the least on this front, on the business model side, is to really be able to build the talent and the talent pool, which spans both domain expertise and technology and services around it, which will be able to help our fintechs and our financial services companies and our technology companies achieve the opportunities that are there on the horizon for the next 10 years. So with that context, I hope that this lays the ground for a very, very fruitful discussion this evening. And once again, thank you for having me here. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Forbes India presents AWS The Mavericks in association with IvyCap Ventures.